What is happening, y'all? Something I have been focused on lately is making decisions more quickly. When I reflect on breakthrough moments in my business, or when things seem to be growing quickly, or when things start working really well, we get momentum, it's typically coming off a decision that's been made. Could be a hiring decision, a firing decision, strategy, whatever the case might be. And many times, those decisions have been difficult for me, and so in the moment, I've delayed them for whatever reason. And as I think about that, what it inevitably means is the faster that I can make those decisions, the faster I can move towards a more favorable outcome or towards the directions of my goals. And so I want to walk you through exactly what I'm doing to make more decisions more quickly and some things that have worked well for me. So if you're new here, my name is Ryan Rice. I'm a full-time real estate investor. Last year we did 7 figures. I share all this with the hopes that it helps you. For the first part of this, understanding the scope of the decision is important. And that's something that I have worked on pretty deliberately. I've heard Jeff Bezos before in interviews. I think it was an interview with Lex Friedman, where he talks about one-way and two-way door decisions. And I really like this principle or this concept a lot. Basically, what he means is that most of our decisions we make are two-way doors, meaning that we can walk through one door. If we don't like what's on the other side, we can simply walk back through that door and then just pick another one. And if that variable is present, if it's a two-way door, then we should make the decision very quickly. And maybe, for example, too, if you have people on your team, maybe those are decisions that you can empower people on your team to make if they were low impact, reversible decisions. But if you have a one-way door decision, one that would be difficult to reverse, the thought process should be much more deliberate. Maybe you slow down to analyze all of the alternatives prior to making the decision. And if you do have a large team, maybe those are the decisions that you are significantly more involved in as the business owner. So let me give you a few examples as to how I'm applying this to my business. I'm launching a new marketing channel, and the channel involves analyzing a lot of data, figuring out who we're going to target, but it's new to me. And so outside of listening to what people ahead of me are saying and doing, and outside of getting my agency's opinion, who's going to handle this marketing channel, I don't really know because I don't have experience. And even the people ahead of me, well, they're not doing it in my market. And so guess what the best way to figure out who to market to is, or whether or not this channel is going to work? It's by freaking starting it. And I'm going to target, a specific group. I'm going to learn, and then I'm going to adjust and keep going. But guess what? If it's not productive, then I can just stop. I can change marketing channels. I can pivot. I can walk back through that door and I can make a different decision. And so the added benefit of me making sure that all of the variables are perfect before I move forward with that decision is essentially useless compared to the benefit I get from just acting more quickly, looking at what has and hasn't worked, and then adjusting from there. If on the contrary, however, I'm looking at a deal, and I have learned this the hard way, but we're going to close on a deal, and it's a multiple $100,000 asset that's going to go on our balance sheet until I sell it, it probably makes sense to slow down and analyze this deal very thoroughly. Take partners if I have to, whatever it takes. Once I close, I can't just unbuy the deal. I have bought it. It is now my asset. The only way I can unbuy it is if I sell it, but that cost could be very high if I bought the wrong asset or I bought the right asset at the wrong price, or worst case scenario, if I buy the wrong asset at the wrong price, then that is a big problem. Another example of what I would consider a one-way door decision is hiring. I just hired 2 people. I was very involved. I spent a significant amount of time on it, both prepping to ensure I had the right frameworks from which to make a good hiring decision, and then actually interviewing the candidates and then analyzing those interviews and picking the best one. And I think a common devil's advocate perspective is, well, isn't that a two-way door? You can just fire the person. And the answer is yes, of course you can fire the person, but I think whether or not it's a one or a two-way door depends on the size of your business and what role you are hiring for. And so if, for example, you have a business with a 7-person sales team, a great sales manager, and you just need one more salesperson, that's probably a little closer to a two-way door decision. You already have a high-performing team. If the person doesn't cut it after a trial period, well, see you later. Little time lost, but no big deal. If, however, you have a business with only 2 employees and you're hiring 2 more, well, you're doubling the size of your business in terms of headcount. And if you bring on the wrong culture fit, half of your culture is going to be driven by the wrong culture fit that you brought on. And so while, yes, you can fire those 2 people in that instance, there is and will be some significant damage that could be done. And you could spend twice as much time undoing that damage that they have done. And it probably makes sense to slow down and ensure that you're picking the right people in that scenario. So me understanding this concept has been very helpful. If I'm facing a two-way door decision, how can I just make the decision or even delegate the decision? Even if I know I'm making the decisions quickly, and because of that, maybe 20 to 30% of them might be wrong, the value I get from the speed at making decisions quickly far outweighs the damage done by actually making them quickly. Next is reflecting on this concept of speed, but a little bit more quickly, or understanding what prevents us from making them quickly. And for me, something that I have struggled with, or something I am focused more on, is the concept of making, quote, the perfect decision. I think in the past, many of us want to avoid failure so much, we fear making the wrong decision so much, that because of that fear, we just don't make it. We want life to make the decision for us, because if we don't make a decision that has an outcome that has a potential outcome that we fear, well, if the wrong thing happens and life makes the decision for us, then we don't have to bear that responsibility. And something I've been thinking a lot about recently is the following framework. Do I have evidence from my past that supports one decision over the other? And if not, is there anyone I know who has the outcome that I want, who I can pull evidence from that supports one decision over the other? And if not, if the answer to both of those questions is no, then there's no point in belaboring the decision. I simply need data. I need to act. I need to look back at the data and then figure out what I'm going to do next. And if a behavior change is warranted, I act again, and then I just repeat that over and over. So let me give a concrete example of how I've recently used this in my business. And I'm going to go back to marketing, right? So I know that I need more volume. Which marketing channel should I launch next? Should I even launch it? Should I wait until one condition in my business improves before I launch this marketing channel? Once I launch it, what are the variables inside that I should consider? Or in other words, once I decide to launch it, well, then how do I launch it? There's just all of these micro decisions within a broader decision. And I could get so caught up in trying to ensure that I make the perfect one, and that the 100 micro decisions within the one broad decision is absolutely perfect. But once I pull my head out of my ass and I see that none of that actually matters, because what I actually need to do is just run the marketing channel, learn from it, and improve from there, that is going to increase the probability that I get to where I want to go more quickly. Now, I'm not saying to recklessly launch marketing channels, but belaboring over the decision or delaying the decision because it's difficult is not going to be fruitful. And I like this too, something I've been using recently. If I am not going to get any more information about a decision to make, then I just need to make the decision. And so go out, if you're going to go launch a marketing channel, for example, go get information. And at some point, there is going to be a level at which you are not going to receive any more information that will be helpful. And once you get to the point where you're not going to receive any more information, that's a good cue for you just to make the decision. But I want to give another example of the, making, quote, perfect decisions that I think is really applicable to brand new investors, which is probably more of my audience, or at least people who are investing actively. When I first started in real estate, I was analyzing deals to offer on. I would spend so much time ensuring that my analyzation was perfect, right? Ensuring that the deal that I was looking at was the one that I wanted. There was no way that my rehab budget would be wrong. I analyzed every single variable, right, to maximize the potential that I get the deal, and then I would send the offer. And after 2 to 3 months, I actually got really pissed because after doing this 30 plus times and not putting any deal in contract, it was difficult. I spent so much time, I had nothing to show from it. And I then had someone tell me, stop spending so much time, stop trying to make everything perfect before you lock down a contract. Make an offer, and then when you get something in contract, then slow down and sharpen your pencil. And it was when I made that adjustment that I actually started buying a bunch of houses. And so because we put pressure on ourselves to make sure that everything is perfect, we spend time that we can't get back trying to ensure that it is perfect, when in all reality, the way that we get closer to perfection is actually the opposite of what we've been doing. It's to do the thing 100 times, acting very quickly, learn from each iteration, and then get better. And there have been studies to illustrate that this is actual. It is factual, backed by science information. And so there was this experiment I heard about a pottery class. They split the class in 2 groups, and the goal was to make the best clay pot. And they told one group to ensure that one clay pot they made was absolutely perfect. And they told the other group just to make as many clay pots as possible. And wouldn't you know that by the end of the exercise, the group who made as many of the clay pots as possible far outperformed the group where the one clay pot had to be perfect. And it was literally like every student's clay pot in the volume groups was better than every other student's clay pot that their goal was just to make the one perfect one. And so that goes to show that the more that you do something, you're going to improve on it. So reducing the amount of time that you make the decision to act and spending as little time as possible trying to predict that something will be perfect is what is actually going to help improve your business more than anything else. And I want to sidebar on improvement for a second, because making the decision as to how we are actually going to improve is a decision-making skill in and of itself. Because if we do a lot of volume and we don't look back at what has and hasn't worked, and we don't iterate on what has worked, and we don't cut out what hasn't worked, then we're actually making the active decision to improve more slowly than we have the potential to improve. And I actually think this is really important. A lot of volume without iteration is just noise. If we take significant action, but we aren't taking the time to reflect on what has worked, we aren't documenting our learnings, we aren't figuring out what behaviors that we need to change, and as a result, our behaviors are not changing, we're just doing the exact same thing over and over and over and over, then the volume that we're doing is kind of pointless. Maybe not futile, because whatever volume that you're doing, you're getting some sort of outcome, but you will never improve if you continue doing volume without iteration. And so when we're making decisions on what our future strategy is going to be or how we get better, we are deciding what we're going to do going forward. We're looking back at what has worked, what hasn't worked, and it's crucial to ensure that we're making the most effective decisions. In a very simple example, when I first started this podcast, when I first started short form content, number one, I was very fearful of even putting it out there. But number two, I had no idea what it was doing. Well, now I have hundreds of pieces of short form content. I have well over 100 podcast episodes. I can look at all of them, and I can look at what has worked and what hasn't. And then I can iterate. And hopefully, if you have been listening since the very beginning, you have probably noticed a difference in my skill at being able to talk to a camera. And it has improved because I've simply looked back at what has worked, and I try to constantly iterate on what it is that I'm doing. Lastly, I want to go through the framework I use to make really difficult decisions. And these are the one-way door decisions, right? And when these decisions come up, I ask myself 3 questions. What is the upside? What is the downside? And can I live with the downside? This came from a book. What was it? I think it was The Road Less Stupid by Keith Cunningham. And ever since I read it, it's been something I put into motion, and it's been very helpful. And so I'm going to give you an example of a big decision that I made without this framework that, had I used, it would have been clear that a different decision would have likely been made. There was this house I bought in 2022. It was a great house, one of the most desirable areas of this particular market. Very expensive. Everyone wants to live there. And my plan on this house was to pop the top, or basically what that means, it was a rancher, so a one-level, one-story home. I was going to blow the roof off and add a second story, do this big addition. I hired a designer who did big, expensive drawings, made it look beautiful, mid-century modern, and it was going to be really cool. And it was going to sell for over $1 million as a result. And because it was going to sell for over $1 million and me buying it at $500,000, I was going to make a whole bunch of money. And so the upside, several $100,000 in profit. That's pretty attractive, right? Well, the questions I didn't clearly ask myself were, what is the downside and can I live with it? And had I asked myself and been very clear and spent a lot of time answering those questions, it would have been clear that the downside risk was high. And the answer to that question of can I live with it would have been, well, I wasn't going to die, but no, I wouldn't want to live with what would happen if the downside occurred. And, you know, I want to sidebar on this for just a second because it might sound like a duh. You didn't think about like what could go wrong in an addition, but you would be surprised on how not distracted, but how lured you can be by the idea of making a lot of money. And so using this framework, particularly when it seems like something is going to be amazing and you're going to make a whole bunch of money, I have found to be very beneficial, especially in like a decision where a FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. I don't want to miss out on making a couple $100,000. I have to do this deal. So I ended up doing the deal, and the downside happened. I ran into some significant operational issues, which I didn't even consider, and it sucked a lot. And I took a big L on that on that deal. And so if you have a big decision in your life, one of those one-way door decisions that either you can't go back on or would be extremely difficult to reverse, deliberately going through the exercise might be helpful. And I don't just mean quickly in your head, like actually write everything out. It's amazing what happens when you get your thoughts all out and then you can analyze them after they're all out. But this is the framework I now use for all of my big irreversible decisions. And by the way, a great decision to use that on is who you're going to marry, which is probably what I have found to be one of the most important decisions that we'll make in our life. But that's for a whole different podcast. So I have been thinking a ton on how I can make better decisions, how I can make them more quickly. I wanted to document those thoughts for you in the event that they are helpful, which, by the way, if you do feel that they're helpful, it would mean so much to me if you shared this with others who might find it helpful. And yes, if you're wondering, am I talking specifically to you? Is it me he's talking to listening? I know there's several of you out there. The answer is yes. I'm talking specifically to you. If instead of just ending out this podcast or swiping or closing, if you can hit that share button, send it to someone else, I would greatly appreciate it. Unless, of course, you think it sucks. And then I don't want anyone else to know about it. So you can just give me that feedback individually. But I appreciate y'all. Thank you so much for listening. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.